Hi all, welcome back to Microbiology Lectures. And the last topic I want to talk about when we're discussing controlling microbial growth is the category of germicidal chemicals and their uses. We'll spend a lot more time talking about things like antibiotics and vaccines later. And so that of course is another way to control microbial growth. But the last topic in kind of this section is germicidal chemicals. Okay, so last time we were talking about the potential of germicidal chemicals, and I started talking about the kind of cocktail approach where you might be using things that are bacteriocides and viralcides and use them together. So then when you spray it on a surface, hopefully it attacks both groups or all the groups. That is an approach that's often used, especially when we're talking about sterilants. So there are some germicidal chemicals that are considered sterilants, and that's great. We need them because we do have quite a few instruments that we use that are heat sensitive. So things that are made out of rubber or plastic, these kind of things, they can't be heated sometimes. Depending on the type of chemical, the chemical's safe enough to use on those instruments and still get a sterilant result. Okay, so sterilants are also sometimes called sporicides because the sterilant itself can destroy endospores, and so that's one of the key components of whether something can be considered a sterilant. Is it has to be able to destroy endospores, and so if it can destroy endospores and vegetative material and enveloped and non-enveloped viruses, then it possibly could be considered a sterilant. And then it also has to meet that requirement of 1 in 1 millionth chance of having a positive pathogen on that material. Okay, so germicidal chemicals also are obviously used in all kinds of categories. The four main different categories: sterilant, high-level disinfectants. So things like hydrogen peroxide, puric acids. These are often considered high-level disinfectants. They can be used on equipment. Sometimes they're used on human like tissue, on living tissue. Sometimes they're safe. Hydrogen peroxide is one of those that is safe, and we'll get back to hydrogen peroxide and why it's safe. But often these high-level disinfectants are good for semi-critical instruments, but they don't do a reliable job on endospores. That's what makes them not a sterilant material. Okay. Intermediate level disinfectants, some of you may be familiar with, like Sanith cloth. These things are good at destroying vegetative bacteria. Sometimes they're very good at destroying types of viruses and fungi, but they don't do a good job at endospores. And some non-membraned viruses, they also do a poor job at those. So often they're used for non-critical instruments, tables, countertops, door handles, these kind of things. Okay? And then the one that most people are familiar with is the one that we sell readily and most consumers use constantly, and these are low-level disinfectants. They can do a very good job at destroying fungi and vegetative bacteria, but some things escape these, and those would be things like Lysol wipes, different types of chemicals that you might be spraying on furniture and floors and walls and whatnot, to clean around your house, where maybe it's not as important for a sterile environment. Clearly, depends on the individual. But again, just realize that these things don't kill endospores and rarely kill non-enveloped viruses. Okay, so to break it all down, put it all together, sterilization, when it comes to a disinfecting level, is good at destroying all known pathogens because it destroys all living and non-living entities. It just happens to be that it's very specialized equipment that can be sterilized. And we're talking, most of the time, we're talking heat and pressure, sometimes chemical, but again, it's very limited. High level means that some endospores can make it through. Okay, the rest of the pathogens don't. Intermediate level, again, intermediate, probably half the things are destroyed, and maybe half are not. And then low level, these would be general consumer stuff. Wash your table with it, clean your counters with it, your toilets, etc. But realize that there's still spores there. There's probably viruses and fungi that are living, etc. Okay, so let's go through some classes of germicidal chemicals. The alcohol's been used for ages, super long time. Okay, maybe, I don't know, but Egyptians used alcohol as treatment for potential wound preparation. We're pretty sure of this, and so been around for a long time. 60-80% solution of alcohol is fairly common in cocktails or in things that have a combination of different germicides. Straight up isopropyl alcohol also is used often. Okay, 91%, even higher than that, 99%. The problem is the higher you go on the alcohol, the more damaging it can be to living tissue. Because the way it works is it does damage proteins, but it also damages membranes, and it can damage living tissue if used incorrectly. Not very reliable on endospores and some non-enveloped viruses. The aldehydes have been used for also a very long time. We know the benefit of the aldehydes for preventing and destroying basically all living organisms and even non-living organisms. It does a great job on everything: spores, fungi, non-enveloped viruses, everything. But the problem that we have with the aldehydes is most of them are carcinogens, most of them are really toxic, and you can't apply it to living tissue because it's going to destroy the living tissue. The one that we're probably we utilize constantly for the purpose of preserving things is formaldehyde or formalin. That product is what we use in embalming fluid, so to preserve humans, for that process, but also scientific material used to be, still is in many cases, preserved in formalin, just because it does a great job in not allowing anything to grow, and things can't grow for basically ever. I don't know how long formalin can hold up and prevent growth, but it's a very, very long time. And so the reason for that is it inactivates proteins and nucleic acids. And again, yes, it definitely is a sterilant, but because of its toxicity, its uses can't be on living tissue. The biguanides Chlorhexidine is probably, I don't want to call it most famous, but it's used very, very often in things like prescription mouthwashes. Wisdom teeth pulled out, lots of prescription mouthwashes. Chlorhexidine is the material that's used to prevent bacteria growth in some envelope viruses. Doesn't do a very good job at endospores, but from a mouth perspective, it's safe enough that you can use it on skin and humans, and for that matter, other animals. It can be used without damaging living tissue, and so very useful. Ethylene oxide is used often when the material that needs to be treated is heat sensitive and moisture sensitive. So you can't get it wet and you can't heat it, so you got to use a gas. So ethylene oxide is a gas. Again, it has its limitations. It has to be used in a specific way. It has to be used in a specific facility. It does destroy microbes and endospores, and normally it works with the process of denaturing proteins or modifying the shape of proteins, and not allowing nucleic acids to copy, and in some cases breaks the nucleic acid bonds down. So again, a lot of these are specialty kind of germicides. They have to be used in specific situations and under certain industries use some more than others, but these are just kind of the classes of the germicides. The halogens, so if you look at a periodic table and you go down the list of halogens, they are used often because they react with proteins. They're oxidizing agents. They'll bind up to a protein, change the shape of the protein, that denatures it. The protein's no longer functional, and the organism, if it was an enzyme that was needed, or if it's part of the electron transport chain or system, doesn't work anymore. And so it does a great job on even endospores and viruses. Chlorine is used constantly. Treat, obviously pool water. We treat tap water with chlorine because it doesn't allow for microorganisms to grow in that material. So it's not just killing things that are there, it's also preventing new growth, but it's caustic and can't be applied directly to most living tissue because it will destroy it. Okay, so bleach obviously is a chlorine-based product. Iodine is another one. The nice thing about iodine is it doesn't have the restrictions that maybe chlorine does. It's less aggressive when applied to living tissue. It's not reliable on endospores, but does do a fairly good job at destroying vegetative bacteria, and majority of viruses tend to not do well in a iodine tincture. So the other great thing about iodine is it can be mixed with alcohol. It can be mixed with water as an iodophore, and then applied in that way. And so again, the nice thing about it is it can be applied to tissue, and we know iodine is used quite often to prep surgical sites or to prep wounds and things like that. So it does a good job at that. Metal compounds used to be heavily used. Different types of metals don't allow for things to grow, and will disrupt the formation of proteins, and so they can be very, very useful. The problem with the metals, and I know they're used in different different operations. But the problem with metals, and why majority of places are moving away from metal compounds, is things like silver nitrate, which used to be used constantly and still is used, but it's not a matter of it doesn't work, or like it works better than antibiotics, or it doesn't work as good as antibiotics. It probably works better, but getting rid of the material, getting rid of the waste is very difficult, because it is a known environmental pollutant. It's also extremely toxic under high concentrations. A lot of these metals can bioaccumulate, and so that's a lot of the problem, and why there's quite a bit of strict regulations on the uses and when you can use them and when you can't. But more so, it's that disposal. After you've used it, how do you dispose of it? That can be extremely expensive, and so lots of industries move away from using metal compounds. Ozone, again, this is just an unstable stable form of oxygen. It's an oxidizing agent, so meaning it's picking up hydrogen ions, so it can disrupt how ATP forms, so it can disrupt protons that are forming. It can bind to proteins and cause shape formation, or change the shape of the protein, rendering it inactive. It can mess with the way at which things flow through a membrane. So there's lots of ways at which oxidizing agents work, and they can be great when used in specific industries. They can be fairly safe, but sometimes you need specialized equipment, or sometimes you need they might not work as well as some of the other chemicals. They're used, ozone sometimes are used in drinking water, and so instead of using chlorine, ozone will be added to the drinking water. And so I think often the facilities that use ozone, they switch to chlorine. I don't want to speak for all facilities, because chlorine's easier. Ozone can be equipment heavy, and so chlorine is typically, it's just the easier way to go about it, disinfecting, especially drinking water, things like that. For oxygens, these are again oxidizers. You're very familiar, most people are very familiar with things like hydrogen peroxide. It's an oxidizer. Again, it's going to pick up electrons, it's going to pick up protons, and then it also disrupts the formation of proteins, or the proteins that are already formed. It can cause their shapes to be denatured, and very effective. Hydrogen peroxide is super effective because of this kind of cool, at least effective for humans, is because of this cool kind of side note, in that we produce catalase, which is the enzyme that can break hydrogen peroxide down. So, we can utilize hydrogen peroxide, and then our body can break it down into water and oxygen. The issue is lots of organisms produce catalase. So there are many bacteria that produce catalase, and protozoans that produce catalase. So sometimes they also can break down this material with the enzymes that they're produced. So sometimes puric acid is used instead of hydrogen peroxide as something like a cleaning agent for those bacteria or microorganisms that can produce an enzyme that will break down hydrogen peroxide, like catalase. Okay. Phenolic compounds or phenolox, phenol like carbotic acid and other things. A lot of these are derivatives and tend to be considered a little safer because a lot of them come from plant material or come from a compound that we can either alter from plants or a compound that is naturally produced by plants, and so some of them are used often. Some of them work against. They're very specialized, so they're kind of only a fungicide or only a bactericide, but nice because they're hydrophobic. So a lot of these can sneak in to or across membranes, and so like if there's a biofilm layer or there's a membrane that's kind of tricky, sometimes the phenols they're just better at getting in. FDA, again, they limit the use of certain things, and whether this is good or not, that's for a debate, other times debate, but they can be extremely useful in denaturing proteins. Again, like a lot of other chemicals, they can be utilized as products, especially since a lot of these are kind of natively made. They can be utilized for human systems, and they don't destroy eukaryotic cells. They're just destroying prokaryotic cells in some cases. Okay, the quaternary ammonia compounds are the quartz. Okay, they're cationic detergent, so they produce cations. Typically low toxicity, so Clorox wipes work along these ways. You can wipe human surfaces, food preparation surfaces, hands. Lots of Clorox wipes were used during COVID. Someone who took stock in Clorox wipes probably made a lot of money. But again, very useful. The only problem with them is they rarely work on endospores, and they have limited use when it comes to non-enveloped viruses. But as a kind of as a detergent or a low toxicity wipe, they're very, very useful. Okay, with that being said, that pretty much covers the classes of the different material. Again, we'll talk about some quats and phenolics that have specialty uses, some of which are much more useful and actually do a very good job at controlling things as we progress and talk about some more special material. Okay, till next time.